Hi, I'm Kevin Stevens, a drummer and educator, and I'm here to teach you the basics of reading rhythms in the next 4 minutes. Notated music is the visual representation of sound. Musical symbols are written on a group of 5 lines and 4 spaces called a staff. Musical symbols represent pieces of sound and silence. Notes represent sound. Rests represent silence. There are notes and rest symbols for different size or lengths of sound and silence. The staff is split up into pieces called measures. We're going to think of these measures as containers that we're going to fill up with pieces of sound and silence. The size of the measure or container is dictated by the pulse of the music and is designated by 2 numbers on top of each other called a time signature. The time signature 4/4 tells us that there are 4 quarter notes in the container, in the measure. The top 4 is the number of beats. The bottom 4 tells us that each beat is worth a quarter note. That's what the 4 represents, quarter notes. This is the most commonly used time signature in pop music, and the names of the different notes and rests are based on a measure of 4/4. A whole note represents a whole measure or 4 quarter notes of sound. A half note represents 2 quarter notes of sound, and a quarter note is worth a quarter measure of sound of 4/4. Each note value has a corresponding rest. We put together these different sized pieces of sound and silence together to fill up each measure. To effectively write out the music you want to hear, you need to put these blocks in a certain order. To read rhythms and interpret this code, we need to understand just 2 things. Whenever we encounter any musical symbol, we ask ourselves these 2 things. 1, is it sound or silence? If it's a note, it's a sound. If it's a rest, it's silence. That's half the game right there. The second thing we need to ask ourselves is how long is that sound or silence? This second answer tells us where to go in the measure for the next piece of information or the next musical symbol. That's it, those 2 steps. Let's take a look at some examples here. In a measure, the first symbol we encounter always starts on beat 1, and we move from there. So we start with our first symbol that we encounter on beat 1. It's a quarter note. Make a sound or no sound? Yes, there is sound. And then that tells us to move over 1 quarter note to beat 2. Make a sound? Yes. Then we move over 1 quarter note to beat 3. Do we make a sound here? Yes, it's a half note. And that is worth 2 beats, so we move all the way over to beat 1. Do we make a sound or no sound? There's no sound. And then we move over 1 quarter note to beat 2. Sound or no sound? Yes, there is sound. Move over a quarter note to beat 3. Now on beat 3, it's a quarter note rest, no sound, worth a quarter note, moves us to beat 4. That's also a quarter note of sound, moves us over 1 beat to beat 1. That is a whole note worth 4 counts, which carries us all the way over to the following measures 1. That's it. So we're going to take a look at another example here. And just like the last example, we remember that the first symbol that we see in every measure starts on beat 1. So in this first measure on beat 1, we see a quarter note rest, sound or silence. That's silence, worth 1 quarter note. 1 quarter note over is beat 2, another quarter note rest. That moves us to beat 3. That's a half note, so we have sound, worth 2 beats. That moves us to 1. That's worth 1 quarter note of sound. To beat 2, that's 1 quarter note of silence. To beat 3, that's a half note rest, moves us over to beat 1. Sound moves us over 1 quarter note to beat 2. Sound moves us over to beat 3, which is worth 2 beats of sound, which moves us to beat 1. The combination of symbols or notes and rests in a measure always stack up to the length of each measure. It cannot be less or more than that designated container size. It has to fill it up perfectly every time. If it does not match up, then there is a mistake in the way the rhythms have been written. We may cut up the measures into smaller subdivisions, but the same rules apply: sound or silence, and for how long. Here is an example where we are using eighth notes as well. Eighth notes divide a measure into 8 equal pieces, and each eighth note or eighth note rest is worth half of a beat. So we start here on 1. That's a quarter note. We make a sound, move over 1 quarter note to beat 2. We make a sound and we move over half of a beat to the and of 2. That's just a half a beat over. We have another eighth note. We make a sound and we move over another half of a beat to beat 3. We make a sound, that's worth a quarter note. We move over a quarter note to beat 4. And on beat 4, we find an eighth note rest. So that's silence. And then we move over half a beat to the and of 4. That's a half a beat of sound. We move over 1/2 beat to beat 1 of the next measure. And that's it. You have all the info right here you need to get started reading rhythms today. Rewatch this video as many times as you need for these concepts to sink in. Please check me out online at kevinstevens.com or on Instagram at kevinstevensdrums. Happy reading.